So today we will be learning about middlewares and why middlewares are so important in Express to the point where everything is basically a middleware in Express.js. Okay, and we'll be learning about how to implement it. And in the next video, we'll be learning about middleware chaining. Okay, okay. So first and foremost, what is a middleware? So whenever you try to request a resource from a server, so whenever I try to access this endpoint, I press enter, then this middleware function runs, which I have not implemented here, which we will be implementing. But basically, whenever I try to access this endpoint, first it goes through the middleware function, and only then does it give me this response. So it sits between the request and response. And this comes in handy a lot of times in the real world whenever you have to authenticate a user, right? Or whenever you have to check whether his tokens are still valid, right? We will be getting into it in the later videos, but just remember that middlewares are very, very, very important, okay? So let's see what happens if we don't implement a middleware, okay? So what I want to do here is whenever I access this endpoint, I want to console.log request dot let's see, the method property as well as request dot URL. Okay, so what this gives me is it gives me the method, which is basically get, right? And then this gives me the URL, which is this homepage. Okay, so let's try running it and let's see what we get in our server. So whenever I hit this homepage and looking at my terminal, I can see that we get the method and the URL. Okay, now, now suppose I want the same thing in every route, right? So just imagine this as like authenticating a user, okay? So this basically runs before any response. Now, let me try and save it. Now, if I go to my home page, if I go to my search page, and if I go to the search product page, what I see is I get the method and the URL for every endpoint, okay? But imagine there could be 50 of these GET requests, right? While building a real full stack app. Or there could be 50 of post requests, you know? So you cannot be adding this function, suppose, to every single one of the requests, right? So what you do is basically it's kind of like inheritance if you have studied object-oriented programming. So what you do is you take this upper level, you add this to one function, and then you use that function in every single request. Okay. So what I will be doing is I'll create a function called logger, and I'll pass in the parameters, and I'll pass this next parameter that I'll be talking about. Okay. And what we will be doing here is basically copy this. Okay. And let's remove this console log from every single one of them. Okay. So now this is a function and we have to add this to every single request out here. Okay. So how you do it is the function sits right in between this. Okay. And notice that I am taking in parameters, but I'm not sending any arguments here. Why? Because Express automatically does it for us. So we do not have to specify the request response arguments, right? It automatically passes it. Okay. Now, okay, let me try running it. Okay. So there's going to be an error here. So whenever I try to access, suppose this endpoint, you can see this error. And now what this basically is that for, oh, sorry, I forgot to pass request. Okay. Yeah, it still gives us the error. Basically, it's still loading, right? It does not load the page. Why? Because every middleware must have a next command, or it should send something. Okay, so I could either I could either modify my request.send in a way that the middleware has intercepted this request. Okay, so I could either send a different output, right? So basically override this request.send so you can see how powerful a middleware can be. Or what I need to do is I need to provide a next command or a next function, I guess. Okay, so only then will it run. So what next basically means is it passes on to the next middleware if there is, or if there's no other middleware, then it just gives me the it just gives me the output from the server itself. Okay, so now you can see that we get the values and the same values for any endpoint out there. Okay, but there are two main problems with this setup, right? So the first thing is, since we are adding this to our index.js file, so you cannot just be adding every middleware to this index.js file, right? So what we have to do is we have to add this function and we have to create a new file. So let's call it middlewares.js, and I will be adding the function here. And what the command to export this function is module.exports logger. Okay. Now, what we do in our index.js file is we have to import this function. So what we do is call logger and require, and then we require from our middlewares function. Okay. And now it should do the same. Okay. All right. So notice how we get the method and the URL here. Okay. So one problem, we have taken care of this one problem. Okay. Now, the next problem is, suppose I want to add this middleware to every method out there, right? I cannot just be adding the name to every single one of them. So what we do is we use a built-in Express middleware, basically, that is called app.use. Notice that we previously used this too. So let me use app.use logger. And now, whenever I remove all of this and save it, the thing still works. Okay, so you might notice that we did use app.use previously too for this command, and now you know what app.use really does, right? And it itself is a middleware. It's a built-in middleware which passes in middleware for every other request out there, right? So basically, Express is all middlewares. Okay, that's the point. And now, what if you do not want to pass this function or, pass this middleware to every single request out there? What if you want to specify the request, right? We can also do that by adding in the URL or the route before this function. So if I just want to pass this to my search function, then whenever I try to access my home page, notice that it does not console log the value. but whenever I go to my search route, it will give me. And the other benefit is this middleware runs in any route that starts with search. So it will run for this endpoint too. So notice whenever I go to product, it returns the URL for product too. So that is how the URL works here. And suppose if I had like search, then suppose if I had product, and suppose if I had like a route, okay, so route parameters. So if I had product ID and whatnot, right, it would still run because the base string is still search, right? So it runs in any other URL that has search in it. So that is another key point about using middlewares. Okay, so that's it for this video, and we will be learning about middleware chaining in the next video, where we will be adding two or more middlewares to a method, right, or a request. So stay tuned for that video, and that's it.